We are so honored to have Patty Harris, first Deputy Mayor of New York City, here with us this afternoon. Patty holds the city's highest appointed position. In this role, she manages the operations of City Hall, supervises policy and personnel decisions, and oversees a number of agencies including Cultural Affairs, Consumer Affairs, Parks and Recreation, Design and Construction, and Landmarks Preservation. Patty supervises the Mayor's Office of Special Projects and Community Events, which coordinates numerous community and citywide events every year. She also offers guidance to the Mayor's Fund to Advance New York City, a nonprofit that facilitates public-private partnerships to raise private money for important public programs. Please join me in welcoming a true urbanist, a champion for our city, First Deputy Mayor Patty Harris.
Thank you so much, Vin. It's great to be here at the 4th annual MAS Summit. I was here at the first, and it's just extraordinary the way it's grown. By bringing together leaders from every aspect of city life, the summit provides an unmatched opportunity to share best practices and new solutions to pressing challenges facing New York City. With more than 100 speakers and over 1,000 participants, it's become a catalyst for innovative ideas that are helping to shape the future of our city. And I'd like to recognize all of the summit speakers and participants for their very important work. And now it's my great privilege to introduce to you two New Yorkers leading today's conversations. Darren Walker is the president of the Ford Foundation. With just weeks into this role, this is Darren's debut public appearance since becoming president. Previously, he served as the foundation's vice president, where he was a driving force beyond initiatives such as Just Films, one of the largest documentary film funds in the world, and Art Place, which supports cultural development throughout the nation. Prior to joining the Ford Foundation in 2010, Darren was vice president at the Rockefeller Foundation, where he helped guide education, civil rights, and workforce development investments. He also spearheaded new programming in urban development and arts and culture while leading Rockefeller's post-Katrina New Orleans recovery program. As a leader in philanthropy, Darren's tremendous vision for the arts and social justice has made a major impact in our city. And although he was born in Louisiana and raised in Texas, he is very much a quintessential New Yorker. Jim Traub, and I should say if you really know Jim, his really good friends call him James. So the public calls him Jim, but if you know Jim, James is really the guy. He is the author of foreignpolicy.com's weekly column, Terms of Engagement, and he's written extensively about international and urban affairs, national politics, and education in the New York Times Magazine section, and the New Yorker, and elsewhere. James has written several books about democracy promotion, the United Nations, Times Square, and City College of New York, and he's currently writing a biography of John Quincy Adams. He is also a teacher of American foreign policy at NYU's Abu Dhabi, and is a fellow at the Center on International Cooperation and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And now I would like to turn the program over to Darren and Jim as they begin their discussion of the Just City. I'm looking forward to a great conversation, and after reading the bios of these guys, I'm not feeling so good about myself. So it's great to know that they're going to be talking to you today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here, and I can see the clock ticking in front of me, so I'm going to talk really fast. So, Darren, since this is your maiden performance, as Patty said, and I've known you for so many years in such a succession of jobs in urban policy and public policy, so I'm curious, now that you're president of the Ford Foundation, do you have to speak with a ponderous solemnity, which is completely... So, what does it mean for you now to occupy this position that you're in?
Well, what it means is that I have this remarkable opportunity to serve and this amazing one-of-a-kind platform to serve. And the Ford Foundation's mission for me is one of the most exciting, exhilarating, challenging, confounding things that we want for the world, and that is greater social justice. The idea that everyone has a voice, and the idea that we need in this country and in this world societies where people of difference can come together, and societies where people who have historically been left out and left behind have opportunity. And so for someone like me, who in this country was certainly from a community that was left out and left behind, to grow up in the United States during a time when there were great advancements socially, many of them spurred by investments of the Ford Foundation. So I went to school, I was the first class of Head Start. Well, Head Start was the result of early childhood research at Yale that the Ford Foundation funded. I went to public schools. I'm always happy to tell my New York friends, because down south this isn't so unusual, but in New York it's so rare. I have never attended a day of private school in my life. And it's very unusual. But back home, when you say that, no one claps because it's quite normative. But I went to college because I was from a low-income family. The Pell Grant made my education possible. Well, the Ford Foundation funded the early research on the Higher Education Act that led to the Pell Grant. So I could go on and on. When I worked in Harlem, where you and I first met, I worked at the Abyssinian Development Corporation. That's a CDC. CDCs were a creation of the Ford Foundation. So for me, it's like coming home to be at the Ford Foundation.
So let's talk a little bit about this idea of the just city. And I want to push on some of the kind of shibboleths that I think go into this. So one thing that one hears all the time is that the just city has to be equitable. Now this issue is one that, of course, has been raised a lot in our current mayoral election. That Bill de Blasio has talked about the need to solve the colossal inequities in New York, and obviously, to some extent, pointing a finger at Patty Harris's boss, our current mayor, who has responded by saying, actually, you're wrong. New York has benefited from its growing inequity because it doesn't mean more poor people. It means there have been more rich people who in turn have been fueling the economy. That in a modern economy, inequity is an inevitable consequence and indeed can be a positive driver for growth. So is equity possibly one of those things that the more you try to achieve it directly, the more it actually eludes you?
No, no.
There we are. Okay.
I think,
next question.
No, to the issue of equity and inequality. It is true that even progressive economists will say that some degree of inequality in an economy is tolerable. It's tolerable when there is a strong social protection and safety net, so that at a minimum people have, no matter where they are, have a basic floor. And so no one is saying that, that inequality has to be eradicated, but we should all be very alarmed by the hyper level of inequality we're seeing. And what is happening in New York, as someone who works in a global organization, this is a global phenomenon that is unprecedented. And so it's
America has more unequal income distribution than
unfortunately, our Gini coefficient, which is the measure of inequality, unfortunately for the United States, it has been going up. And so it is regrettable because
But why? Is it regrettable morally, or is it regrettable for some more tangible reason?
For both. I mean, it's regrettable tangibly because it is harmful to our democracy. It's when you have a society that is based on a narrative that says at the core of it is opportunity, no matter where you come from, what color of your skin, no matter your religion, that there is an opportunity ladder that everyone can get on. that there is a mobility escalator that everyone can get on. When that narrative, when the facts invalidate that narrative, it is harmful to our democracy. So tangibly, yes.
And given the current tax-cutting mood in Washington, it seems like there's no reason to expect that this is going to get better, that everything we see, all the arrows we see point in the direction of greater inequality, yes?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. And it's not all about taxes, and it's a mistake to make this about vilifying rich people and the wealthy. First of all, there are a lot of wealthy people who are very alarmed by this. And if you look at many of the think tanks and progressive organizations that are receiving their funding from wealthy people, I mean, so it is wrong to say, oh, well, the rich are bad and they don't care about these things, they just care about, of course there's a subset, but it's a mistake to create this oppositional idea, because I don't think that is in fact the reality. I think there are a lot of people who are very deeply disturbed by the trends that we see in our society around inequality.
Okay, let me bring it back to the city and some of the issues of urban planning that are so central to the Municipal Art Society. So another of the issues that one hears in the idea of a just city is to have a more democratic and transparent process of planning. Now, as you know, I wrote a book about Times Square, and Times Square is a great example of non-transparent, non-democratic development, but it was in part a reaction to what was seen as the excesses of democracy, that New York could never get anything built like Westway, for example, because every community group could block it. Mm-hmm. So, again, democracy, obviously a good thing in urban development, but is there as much danger from too much as too little?
Right, but I think it's wrong to create these false dichotomies so that we hold Westway as an example and then Times Square and say it's either or. I think that there are certainly excesses. I mean, and there are places that you see in the United States or in India or where participatory processes go off the rail. There's no doubt about that. But I think that it is core to our democracy to have participation. And I think often things go off the rail because people don't feel like their voices are being heard. And so I think there were lessons, and I think it is true that sometimes large-scale planning is essential, but that planning should be participatory.
Okay, let me ask a slightly different question, which is, you spent an enormous amount of your career in Harlem, in working on development in Harlem. And what we see now in Harlem is, in some ways, the community of Harlem has succeeded, but the people in Harlem, people who have traditionally been in Harlem, black people, have been getting moved out. They've been getting displaced. And so that poses a really hard problem in terms of what it means to be a successful and a just city. The forces that you would need to use to prevent displacement might also prevent the city being a dynamic place. At the same time, the idea that the city could be successful and the people in it would be evicted, that doesn't seem just at all. So is this a soluble problem? How do you adjudicate or balance the force of dynamic growth, which brings new people in, and also the wish not to completely displace the people who were there in the first place?
So the thing that I love about this city and about this thing called America is that we have this constant contested idea of the intersection of the market and capitalism and democracy. And it is so exciting to be a part of it. And when I was in Harlem, working at Abyssinian on the ground, you dealt with that every day. And so the intersection of class and race and participation and who has the final say, this is all being played out. But we used to say, if Lenox Avenue becomes Columbus Avenue, will Harlem still be Harlem? And I think the answer is no. I mean, Harlem won't be Harlem as we have known it. I was this is going to sound rather provocative, but I was having brought some friends up for dinner from out of town to Harlem, and one of them turned to me, and he's white, and he said, "Oh my gosh, you know, I thought I was coming to Harlem to see black people." And and he said, you know,
That's a rumor.
and he said, well, but he said, you know, gosh, when I come to Harlem and go to a restaurant, I want to see black people. And I said, well, you know, Harlem has changed. And you're going to see black people, but you're going to see white people, and you're going to see a very diverse community. And it's true, when I lived in Harlem in the early 90s, you wouldn't see a white woman at 10 o'clock on the number 2 train at 135th Street, but now you do. I actually think that's great, and I think most people in Harlem think that's great. I think what people don't think is great is that, and I think New York has done a much better job. The policy that has been in place in Harlem around affordable housing, it is true that there has been displacement, but there are a lot of people who benefited from public policy. The set-asides for any development in Harlem had 30%. You had to live, we had to set aside for current residents. Harlem has a huge concentration of public housing that is always, it's public housing, it's low income. There is a significant number of tax credit housing. There's senior subsidized housing. So it is true that there has been displacement, but as urban revitalization efforts go, Harlem has been a huge success. And so I think we should learn from the really good things that happened there, and there were definitely some negative externalities that I wish we could reverse.
What are you referring to there?
Well, meaning that it would be nice to earlier in the process to have more homeowners. So we had a lot of people who were renters because in the 60s, many of the owners of those brownstones moved out of town, or their kids now own them, or their grandkids, and they're the landlords. And they were just rent collectors. And so the renters were then more likely than not low-income African Americans who, as this market now has turned around and those properties have been put on the market, those people are having to move out, or they can't afford the rent. So that's a negative externality that I wish were different.
But when you look at the dynamic now, I mean, is there a reasonable fear that Lenox Avenue will turn into Columbus Avenue, in your friend's expression, and that Harlem will become an increasingly vibrant but also increasingly non-black, to what you would say is too great a degree, place?
No, I don't think the fact that Harlem is becoming less black is a problem.
Okay.
I think that there is a cultural identity that Harlem uniquely holds in the cultural narrative of this nation. And so when we think about Harlem, there are things that come to mind. And so whether it's the Renaissance, whether it's the great tradition of African American churches, whether it's the amazing historic structures there, the culture, and we don't want to lose that. That's part of the American narrative, our cultural fabric. So that isn't a racial thing, it is a cultural phenomenon that we should want to preserve. And it's that tension that I speak of that is what's so exciting.
So I see we have 43, 42, 41 seconds left. So I want to ask you just briefly about building affordable housing, because that's an important Ford initiative. And I noticed it was discussed in the debate between the two candidates for mayor the other night. So could you talk briefly about what Ford is doing, and more broadly about what it is that needs to be done in order to create a decent stock of affordable housing in our big cities?
So again, because we work internationally, but the trends and the issues are the same whether you're talking about, you know, Kibera in Nairobi or Dharavi in Delhi or whatever. The issue is that housing for low-income people, there have to be policies, because that intersection of the market and public policy makes it very, very hard without public intervention and policies that are intentional, where you truly want.
And so briefly, what would those policies be in your mind?
Those policies would be Section 8 in the United States,
Yeah.
More Section 8 housing locally, more tax credits to private developers to make it possible for them, more opportunities for public-private partnerships, more money to groups like Liskin Enterprise to allow them to amplify and scale their very successful strategies.
Great, thank you. And we're only 32 seconds over. Great, thank you so much, Darren.
Thank you.